Hi, welcome to part 2 of our continuing study of India's most beloved spiritual wisdom text, the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of Our Lord, here in the Eknath Easwaran translation from Nilgiri Press, 2007, second edition. Order yours today. I'm not a salesman. I don't work for Nilgiri Press. I'm not getting a commission here. I'm a college professor assigning you this book because you need this book to really open up your deepest understanding and appreciation of this really essential classic of world wisdom literature. These videos are a great start though. So last time in video 1, we set the stage, right? We looked at chapters 1 and 2 of this 18 chapter classic. And chapter 1 just sort of paints a picture of a battlefield before the battle, and there's two armies arrayed on either side looking at each other. And the leader of one army, our hero Arjuna, tells his subordinate, his underling, Krishna, who's the chariot driver, to drive the chariot out in the middle of the battlefield. And there Arjuna looks around and he sort of opens his heart and pours his guts out to his friend Krishna. He says, I don't want to fight. This is wrong. All these people are going to die, and for what? And Krishna says in chapter 2, you're not wrong. Your compassion's good, but you're mistaken. So let me drop some knowledge on you. And for the rest of chapter 2, Krishna begins to teach, and that's really the structure of the whole rest of the book. The whole book takes place before the battle, with Krishna and Arjuna in the middle of the battlefield having this discussion, with Krishna doing most of the talking. So it's your classic, kind of like the Katha Upanishad was, kind of a classic teacher-student discussion. So it is sort of Upanishadic in its structure, but as we mentioned in the first video, the Bhagavad Gita has an everyman appeal, an every woman appeal that is sometimes hard to see in the Upanishads and impossible to find in the Vedas. So that, perhaps, as we mentioned last time, is one of the key reasons why the Bhagavad Gita is the most popular, beloved of all the Indian wisdom texts. Krishna and Arjuna, this story has been made into countless film versions and graphic novels, and you see Krishna on lunchboxes. I mean, this story's become pop culture. That is a remarkable testimony to the central power of this story in the Indian consciousness, and for all of us around the world, from all over the place, who love wisdom literature, and this stuff is pretty good. So in chapter 2, after Arjuna confesses, I don't want to fight, Krishna says you should, and here's why. And the next 17 chapters of this 18 chapter book are Krishna explaining to Arjuna, here's why you have to fight. The first reason was the Atman. You don't understand what death is, he says. What you are was never born and will never die. There never was a time when you did not exist, Krishna says to Arjuna, nor will there ever be a time when you cease to exist. The immortal, capital S self, the Atman, is unborn and undying. And that contextualizes physical death for us. Krishna at one point says to Arjuna, I have already slain all of these warriors. Which is a poetic way of saying everything that is born is going to die. We're all on death row. Each of us are condemned to die. Taking form means dissolving out of form. If you want one, you get the other. So perhaps Krishna is saying to Arjuna, don't get so excited about that, especially when you add in the Hindu idea of reincarnation, yeah? But even without that, the point is made. So the immortality in both directions of the Atman. The second point Krishna made in chapter 2 was, you have a purpose, you have a dharma, a duty. Everything in the cosmos serves everything else. We are being supported and sustained by the air and the water and the food and the work of others. And so too, we have a moral obligation to serve in the capacity in which we have been gifted. And you're a soldier, you're a kshatra, you're in the political military caste. This is your gig. If you don't do this work, Krishna says, a bunch of people are going to die. You don't want to do the work because a bunch of people are going to die. But if you don't do the work, then a bunch of other people are going to die. So no matter what you do, people are going to die. But as we also worked through last time, Gandhi insists on reading this book as a metaphor. This is not a military manual on the authorization of human slaughter. This is a subtler, poetic song, verse, about the struggle you and I and everyone else is in too. How to take action in the field of action. When you hire somebody, 90 other people don't get a job. You ruin their lives. Once you take on more and more adulting responsibilities, you start losing sleep. Trying to raise kids, you're always withholding from them things that they want, and they cry and they scream and they hate you, and you want, every fiber of your being makes you want to indulge their every whim. But if you do that, you ruin their life. You give them zero chance of cultivating their own self-governance, their own moderation, their own virtue. So we must fight to build our own lives, the lives of our families. And that's the fight that we're all engaged in. But there's a way to do it. And that third point in chapter 2 gets picked up here in chapter 3, and it was karma yoga, meaning selfless action in plain English, work without attachment to the fruits of work. So let's jump into chapter 3. Krishna is saying in verse 4, one who shirks action does not attain freedom. No one can gain perfection by abstaining from action or work. So a little bit of a dig there against the ascetics who just want to go sit in the forest and meditate. Again, this is that middle path, if I could borrow that phrase from Buddha. This is that middle path philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna kind of mocks the extremes on either side. The people who think you can just do action, and the people who think, well, I'll just sit home and abstain from all action and attain enlightenment. He says, one who shirks action does not attain freedom. No one can gain perfection by abstaining from work. And in verse 5, indeed, there is no one who rests for even an instant. All creatures are driven to action by their own nature. Let's sit there for a minute. We're going to see this unfold for the rest of the book, all the way through chapter 18 even. Our own natures drive us to action. What does that mean? Well, for one thing, I have a biological body, and I need to keep it 98.6 degrees. And it's 70 degrees in this room, so I have to burn calories. I have to eat food. And that food is made out of formerly living things. So I'm driven by hunger to kill and eat plants and drink milk and eat eggs and eat meat even, wherever you are on the vegan to carnivore spectrum. I have to eat living things. What about my loneliness? I'm gonna find a partner. I want to partner up with somebody, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, but I'm gonna go for it. And so I'm driven to that action, and I'm driven to all kinds of actions. My ego, I want to create. I want to learn how to play the guitar and write songs, and we are driven to action by our own nature. So you can't not act. That's the bottom line. Even if you're sitting perfectly still. Longtime students of mine, who've seen a lot of my other videos when we discuss karma, right? Action, you can't not act, even if I hold perfectly still. Again, my mind is racing, my body is burning fuel, my cells are firing. There is no opting out of action in Gandhi's metaphorical terms. We are already in Arjuna's battlefield. And like in chapter 1, you can be like Arjuna and drop your tools and just crumble to the ground and say, I don't want to. but you're already in it. If you take embodied form, you are in the field of action. Now your only choice is, what kind of action are you going to take? And what principles and values are going to guide those actions? So Krishna goes on in verse 8, fulfill all your duties. Action is better than inaction. Even to maintain your body, Arjuna, you are obliged to act. Yeah, like I just said. Selfish action imprisons the world. Act selflessly without any thought of personal profit. Through selfless service, you will always be fruitful and find the fulfillment of your desires. Oh, there's a nice little promise. You know, don't worry, are you going to get yours? Give yourself in selfless service, and the Lord will prepare a table for you in the presence of thine enemies, if I might borrow from the Psalms there. Look at the lilies of the field. They neither toil nor spin, and look how beautiful they are. Look at the birds of the field. Look how they neither lay up nor store grain, and look how God cares for the least of these. I'm riffing on Jesus's the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. It's the same idea. If God takes care of all of that, do you not think that you'll be supported? Again, in the Western Christian tradition, they'll call it have a little faith, have faith that God's grace is always pouring down. All you have to do is prepare yourself to receive it, empty out and leave some room, and it'll keep coming in. That's why Gandhi read the Sermon on the Mount and the Gita every day. So in chapter 3, there is then that singular focus of karma yoga, how to act without attachment. So let me jump over to verse 15. This is powerful stuff. Krishna says, every selfless act, Arjuna, is born from Brahman, the eternal, infinite Godhead. Brahman is present in every act of service. All life turns on this law, O Arjuna. Those who violate it, indulging the senses for their own pleasure and ignoring the needs of others, have wasted their life. But those who realize the self, the Atman, are always satisfied. Having found the source of joy and fulfillment, they no longer seek happiness from the external world. They have nothing to gain or lose by any action. Neither people nor things can affect their security. Every selfless action is born from Brahman. So when you do your duty, that is Brahman working through you. It reminds me of the great St. Francis prayer. That's attributed to him, but probably written in the 20th century. But in either event, many people know it. Lord, make me an instrument of you, so that every room I walk into, let me speak your words. Let my love be your love pouring through me. Let me be the presence of you wherever I go. Use me. And so in the theistic religions of the West, Islam and Judaism and Christianity, there is that sense that I have a duty to serve in Hebrew, tikkun olam. The idea that each of us must participate in the healing of the world. That's why we're here. That's why we took form, to be a part of the healing of the world. The creation is ongoing, and you see that same perennial wisdom all through the Bhagavad Gita. There's a lot of ways to get it wrong, and very few ways to get it right. He says in verse 25, Krishna says, the ignorant work for their own profit, Arjuna. The wise work for the welfare of the world without thought for themselves. Remember what we just said before. You're going to get fed. You're going to get loved. You're going to get taken care of. It's the great spiritual paradox of all the traditions, if I could put it this way. You only get to keep what you give away. I know, what? That doesn't make any sense. You only receive what you give. He goes on in verse 26, Krishna says, by abstaining from work You will confuse the ignorant who are engrossed in their actions. Perform all work carefully, guided by compassion. All actions are performed by the gunas of Prakriti. Deluded by identification with the ego, a person thinks, I am the doer. But the illumined man or woman understands the domain of the gunas and is not attached. We'll say much more about the gunas and Prakriti as we go forward. But for now, suffice to say that Prakriti is the factory that makes the world of forms. Purusha, the person of Brahman, pours forth through Prakriti all of the manifest forms. And the way a spider makes spider web, Prakriti spins out 3 threads. Guna means thread, sattva, rajas, and tamas. Illumined energy, and wisdom. Sattva is light and clarity and wisdom. Rajas is kind of ambition and frenetic energy like fire, but doesn't know where to go. And tamas is inertia and ignorance and darkness. And not a lot of good comes from that. But those 3 gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, weave the world. And so that was a key idea there, that the wise, Krishna says, understand that everything that is happening is it's just fulfilling its own nature. You know, a tiger is going to eat an antelope. That doesn't make a tiger evil. And the antelopes keep having baby antelopes partially to fulfill their own dharma, and one aspect of their dharma is to feed tigers. It isn't pretty, but it's how everything is interconnected in this rich tapestry, and that the wise then realize that when I take action and when I take action selflessly and fulfill my dharma, that is Brahman moving through me. Or another way to say that is simply the carrying out of the nature of all the forms around me. It's not me doing it. And so that's essentially chapter 3. Now let's jump over to chapter 4, because it's really the same idea. It's called wisdom in action. And now Krishna is starting to reveal a little bit more about himself. Krishna says to Arjuna in verse 6 of chapter 4, my true being is unborn and changeless. I am the Lord who dwells in every creature. Through the power of my own Maya, I manifest myself in a finite form. So he's kind of blowing Arjuna's mind right now. He's revealing himself as an incarnation of God, of the One, of the Lord. I made Maya. I made Prakriti. I made the 3 gunas. I made my own body. I took form to be here with y'all to teach you, Arjuna, and now through the centuries, all of us, these Vedic truths, these perennial, timeless insights, the Sanatana Dharma, the unborn truth. And then in verse 7, he says something intriguing, sort of explains why he's here now. He says in verse 7, whenever Dharma declines, whenever order and truth decline, and the purpose of life is forgotten, I manifest myself on earth. I am born in every age to protect the good, to destroy the evil, and to reestablish Dharma. So he's sort of saying, this is that beautiful Hindu idea of the avatars that come from Vishnu, including Rama right there. He's another one, like Krishna. Some say Buddha, many other avatars. And one could imaginatively expand this to say that in every century and in every culture, teachers come who, like biblical prophets, just, have insight from above and bring the truth. Muhammad, we could start seeing all the great world wisdom teachers in this light. It's a beautiful idea that whenever Dharma declines and the purpose of life is forgotten, I come back. And in verse 9, he says, those who know, now follow this closely. This is Krishna, who just identified himself with the all that is, Brahmanatman, Krishna says, those who know me as their own divine self, Atman, break through the belief that they are the body and are not reborn as separate creatures. Aha! We could stop reading. There's the whole Gita right there. Now we're not here just to worship Krishna in a dualistic way. One could certainly do that. And this book is of supreme importance to the Society for Krishna Consciousness, what we in the West sometimes colloquially call the Hare Krishnas. You know, they go through the airport and they hand out flowers and they play the harmonium and they sing these beautiful songs. It's kind of a devotional movement within Hinduism with a lot of American roots that reads this book the way evangelical Christians read the New Testament. For them, Krishna is the Lord incarnate who we must devote our lives to, who we must have a loving devotional relationship with. And that is certainly a very powerful impulse in Hinduism, bhakti yoga, devotional yoga. But that's not the only way to read the Bhagavad Gita as just a devotional text. But it's certainly a big road, a big lane down the multi-lane highway of what the Gita is that devotional piece. But in verse 9, we get that jnana yoga kind of piece. Those who know me as their own divine self, those who identify with the Brahman Atman, they are realized and they will not be reborn. And then he says something really key, I think, in verse 11. He says, he's talking about the spiritual seekers now. He says, as they approach me, so I receive them. All paths, Arjuna, lead to me. So Krishna is telling us in plain language, you don't have to contort into some weird kind of practice or person to find me. However you come toward me, that's how I receive you. I mean, later in the Gita, and I'm sure we'll cross this path later, but I feel like saying it now too, Krishna will go further on that theme and say, I am all the gods, I am all the goddesses, I am all the scriptures, I am all the religions. Worship whatever you want. Worship Allah, worship Odin, worship Jesus and the Father and the Holy Spirit. Those are all forms of me, and by me he means the nameless ground of being, the divine source, of which he too is just a form that he has concocted himself. So this is getting big. This is getting a little unwieldy. Krishna is really kind of pulling into himself the entire world of world religions, all paths. As they approach me, so I receive them. Kind of saying, just be selfless, do your duty, love what you love, cause as little harm as possible, and you're good. You're on the path, because there are many paths to the summit, as Ramakrishna will say, the great Hindu saint of the 19th century. He says, actions do not cling to me because I am not attached to their results. Those who understand this and practice it live in freedom. So no matter what you do karmically, the Atman within you is unaffected. Karma doesn't stick to the Atman, it sticks to the egoic self, which is reborn and reborn. Here's a puzzling phrase that I and my students have spent many, many hours discussing. I want to share it with you here. This is verse 18 from still in chapter 4. The wise see that there is action in the midst of inaction and inaction in the midst of action. Their consciousness is unified and every act is done with complete awareness. There is action in the midst of inaction. So when you're holding still, we kind of touched on that before. When you're holding perfectly still in inaction, there's action going on inside of you. And conversely, when you're taking action in the world, there's a stillness within you. The Atman does not take action. It is not part of the world of karma or of action. So there's stillness within you wherever you're moving, And when you are holding still, there is movement within you. It's this beautiful sort of poetry that suggests more than it says. The awakened sages call a person wise when all his or her undertakings are free from anxiety about results. All his selfish desires have been consumed in the fire of knowledge. The wise, ever satisfied, have abandoned all external supports. Their security is unaffected by the results of their action. Even while acting, they really do nothing at all. Free from expectations and from all sense of possession, with mind and body firmly controlled by the self, the Atman, they do not incur sin by their performance of physical action. They live in freedom who have gone beyond the dualities of life, competing with no one. They are alike in success and failure and content with whatever comes to them. They are free without selfish attachments. Their minds are fixed in knowledge. They perform all work in the spirit of service, and their karma is dissolved. This could perfectly fit the description of a Catholic saint, of a Sufi master, of a Zen master. This is where the wisdom traditions, I don't want to say join together into one because that's inaccurate, but where the walls between them become diaphanous, become porous, and the perennial wisdom begins to simply rise up regardless of label, regardless of creed, regardless of tradition. So let's wrap up our second video here, and in video 3, in part 3 of the Bhagavad Gita, we'll take up chapter 5, 6, and 7 and go on from there. Thank you for being with us up to this point. See you on the other side.